So I want to spend just a couple of minutes to kind of talk about me, because it's going to help you understand the whole evolution of our journey to GovCloud. So many years ago, graduated high school, joined the U.S. Army, and at some point while I was in, I decided that I wanted to be a paratrooper. So went through the process, went into what they call jump school to train to become a paratrooper. And because I shared the same last name as the home of the 82nd Airborne, I was a target. So if you don't know, that's Fort Bragg. My last name is Bragg. And I was a constant target. So as I'm sort of evolving through school, it came time for us to actually jump out of an airplane. Well, because I was the target, they said, you stand in the door. So I get the door position, my very first jump, never jumped out of an airplane, scared to death. So I'm standing there, doors open, we're flying. Light goes green, I get that tap, and I jump without hesitation. And everything worked out great. I'm here, right? So it worked. But, you know, all of that to bring me to this point, which is I relied on training. And then that training became instinct and reflex. So it's the same thing that at least I use when I apply it to my everyday job. It's training. It's relying on the foundation that I've built over the years. So as we went on our journey to the cloud, did the same thing. Said, okay, take the leap of faith. It's okay, don't worry about it. Rely on my technical foundation and use that to help carry the team. Which is all I did was carry the team. So a bunch of smart guys doing all of the hard work. And then I would stand out front and say, hey, we did it. But it was really them. They did it. But I get some of the benefit of that for managing the team. So it's using that foundation to help drive our overall success to the cloud migration. And with that, I'll get started. So agenda's going to be pretty simple. I'll tell you a little bit about HSIN. Homeland Security Information Network is what it stands for. How we got started with our migration process was some lessons learned, and then Q&A if anyone's interested. So HSIN is the Homeland Security Information Network. It is the front door to information sharing for the Department of Homeland Security. Our partners are vast. We touch federal, state, local, territorial, tribal, international, private sector, and we have federated systems as well. Jurisdictions, we touch every end of industries out there. Defense, emergency management, emergency services, infrastructure protection, intelligence, law enforcement, and public health. These are all of our partners, and many of these partners use HSIN to manage, some of their operations daily, and absolutely during incidents or some high-level events. So in 2006, HSIN was designated as the primary system for operational information sharing between DHS and all of its partners, the list of partners on the previous slide. HSIN is a secure and trusted platform. Our requirements are user-driven, stakeholder-driven. We don't do IT for the sake of doing IT. We don't shove IT down anyone's throat. They come to us. This is what we need in order to complete our mission. We execute. And we actually take it very seriously. So HSIN it's a platform of several tools and applications. We do collaboration, chat, secure messaging, notification, where we're used for command and control in large-scale events. We're used for command and control during incidents of every nature. There's some departments actually use HSIN every day to manage sort of the outlook and information sharing between them and their sister or partner agencies. HSIN actually is a mission-critical system within the department, and that actually helped drive the need for us to get to the cloud and get out of the rigid environment of a data center. So in 2013, HSIN underwent a major release to its service offerings. So we converted from what today we call HSIN Legacy to what is now called HSIN R3. And it wasn't a small task. So the previous slide showed you several services that HSIN offers. So there's not one application. It's a suite of different applications providing different functionality. So we went through that process, and in 2014, we completed what I would call the stabilization and optimization phase, which, if you go through a migration, you better have those, or at least understand what the tail end of your migration is going to look like. So once we went through the migration and we actually had R3 stood up, we were fine. At that point, I knew that we had a battle-tested team. We were hardened. And the team, both federal and contractor, had bought into the mission. We worked day and night. There were no weekends just to get the system migrated. When we started talking about going to the cloud, we knew we were going to have to take on that same type of effort. And felt confident because we knew that the team that we had could do it. They had certainly proven to be battle-tested, and they bought into the mission, like we all do. So we had to ask ourselves, would this work for HSIN? We performed extensive analysis. Some would say that we actually suffered from, the paralysis by analysis. We were what appeared to be stuck. We weren't really moving. We were just overanalyzing and overanalyzing. There's good and bad there. I tend to think that we did it out of necessity because the system has to be up, it has to be available, has to be reliable, and we needed to perform at a very high standard. So it looked and felt like paralysis, but it was actually just extensive and intensive analysis. And the outcome of all of that activity was, we can do this, we should do this, and let's get it done. So we had to figure out, we said, okay, we're going to go to the cloud. Now, which one? So we know we were going to go commercial, but there were some hard and fast rules that we needed to make sure that we adhered to and made sure that the provider offered. Most importantly was FedRAMP High. And when we made that determination and said we have to be at a FedRAMP High, it shrunk the pool down to one because at that time there was only one. So we married up with AWS. They became a close and valued partner as we began our migration and relied on them often. And they responded in a way that I certainly appreciate to this day because we still have lots of questions and we're still going through a learning phase. Even though we've been there, we've been in the cloud now at production almost a year. Wow. I just realized that. I'm sorry. Wow. So yeah, we're still actually learning, which is a good thing. So we had some initial risks, as any project would. The biggest one was our timeline. We were up against a contract that we had with DHS data center, and we needed to move out of that data center before our pop. So it was we didn't have any room. We couldn't push this project to the right at all, but we did. I'm sorry. I'm a bad project manager. Yeah, I had to slide it, but for good reasons. It's always good reasons, right? So we did slide it, but we only slid it by about 5 weeks, and it was really the right thing to do. We hadn't properly secured the right SOC engagement, so we had to go back and rework that. But it was for the better. Because one thing, the system needs to be secure. We need to make sure that we have the right eyes on the system at all times. The other big risk that we had was connectivity. There was no real connectivity into GovCloud. We didn't know how we were going to do it. At the time, the department was going through a change in their network infrastructure, and we weren't sure whether we were going to go with the proposed change. Should we implement something different? And even though this was essentially one of the long poles in the tent, this wasn't solved until a few months before we migrated. This rode on our backs almost the entire time of the project. But once we identified the proper solution and then a backup to that solution, we were rock solid at that point. But that risk rode us basically the duration of the project. This was huge for us. Operational responsibilities. We were leaving, the nest, the warm and fuzzy that we get knowing that it's not my responsibility, it belongs to the data center. I don't have to do anything, the data center owns that. There's a clear line of demarcation between my responsibilities and the data centers. It gets a little gray sometimes, and we'll fight it out, and as long as I win, we're good. But this was huge for us because we had to, one, understand what they did. To us, it was just a black box. We paid some money and we got all this stuff. Things just happen. So we had several deep dive conversations with data center engineers to understand what they offered us. How do you do this service? Can you tell us how we're going to do it? And through that, we actually began to understand the full scope, the depth and breadth of this on-taking that we were about to take on. It was massive. Again, we had a battle-tested team, but we were small team. And we would end up having to matrix several different teams into one and teach that team how to function as a unit. No more can you say, oh, I'm the development engineer, I don't do that. You do now. And we were lucky enough to have, competent federal staff and then fully engaged contractors who were willing to work across some of the grayness to help us get to where we needed to be. So from that, we actually created a new DevOps sort of operational team. The second thing was, and we really got stuck here, was infrastructure as code, which was fine. We needed to do that. But what we started off doing was going very, very deep into automation. We wanted to automate everything. It's the cloud, right? It's what you're supposed to do. We wanted to automate everything. We spent almost a year trying to automate everything. And at some point, it was just too much. We're not, again, the paralysis. For me, if I don't feel like we're moving, I'm an old school IT guy. I need movement. I need to see activity. I prefer to see, a box with blinking lights. I'm starting to accept this cloud stuff. So we were doing too much. And, a decision needed to be made. Okay, stop. We're not going to do that anymore. Infrastructure as code, yes, because we need to be able to build infrastructure quickly. Some applications, maybe. How critical is that application? How do we build it? How do we come back from catastrophic failure? Do I need to have that ability to rebuild instantly? So once we started to make those sort of determinations, we were moving again. That was actually a huge issue for us to overcome because we did what we thought we were supposed to do. You go to the cloud, it's all automated. So we had some security considerations we had to make. We were making a major change in our posture. We were already a FISMA High system, or High mod, and we were going to High, which really drove the emphasis for us to go to a FedRAMP High provider. That was crucial for us, and actually it was burdensome as well. We needed to understand how we were going to take the new FedRAMP package, incorporate that into our ATO package, staff turnover, things like that. This was actually a huge issue. If you are going to the cloud and you have to accreditate your system, and I'm assuming you will, get out in front of security immediately. It's kind of a catch-22 because you can't build if you don't have accreditation, but you can't accreditate if it's not built. There's this weird dance that you have to do, and then if you're smart, you're going to want to test repeatedly and often. So the thing that you build you want to test it. And then, okay, well, how do I test it? I need you to loosen up a little bit so that I can test this thing. And I need to test it in the environment that I'm building. It became a very strange dance that took us some time to overcome. So for sure, I would say get out in front of security, lock arms with your ISSO and ISSM, and buy them lots of dinners. Once we got there, so we had HSIN fully functional in the cloud. It's up and it's running. We are ecstatic. We can't believe we actually did it. But I still have my system that is my production system still functioning. And I need to now figure out how to maintain that system. I need to maintain the cloud system. I have a team of about 5 people who I've literally burnt out over the last 6 months because as we got closer to that date that I can't shift to the right, there were no more nights and weekends. So it's, let's get small, compress, figure out how to do it, sort of the reach one, teach one kind of thing. Grab somebody, teach them how to do that so I can get you focused over here. So there was a lot of that. So there was a lot of there's a lot of FM in how this stuff kind of happened. There's a lot of magic in how we sort of managed those 2 parallel systems. Because even though the cloud system was not production, it needed to be treated as if it were. Because once it went, it is. And there's no room for, oh, I forgot, I didn't check that, I didn't do that. It needed to be treated as if it was production. So that small team had to manage both systems at the same time, and it was a daunting task. Synchronizing data was very tricky. We initially thought about this. We couldn't figure out how we were going to do this. We have quite a bit of data. Amazon provides solutions to data transfer. And what feels archaic and sounds kind of funny, but it's probably the best option, it's what we chose initially, is essentially SneakerNet. We drove down to the data center, plugged in, their massive thumb drive, Snowball, if you've done it before, they call it Snowball. And over the course of a weekend, transferred all of our data onto the Snowball. And then we took Snowball back, turned it over to Amazon, and they transferred our data into an S3 bucket, at which point we then started pulling it down and putting it where it needed to be. Now we have our first source of data on our cloud system, but it's not in sync. From the day that we moved it, or the minute we copied it, it was old data. There are people on system, on HSIN 24/7. So we needed to come up with ways to sync the data. Our various databases needed to be synced. We had flat files that needed to be synced. So the team got together. We came up with a few different solutions, most of which were manually intensive. Because again, we didn't have time to sit back and try to automate a real solution. They're tools, and we used some, but most of it was, old school rudimentary. I like that. few things that we had to deal with. Performance of the system was crucial. Our stakeholders and user base rely heavily on HSIN. HSIN's performance needs to be optimal at all times. So we understand what our baselines look like. And we took those measures and applied them against our GovCloud instance. And, for me, initially, I was amazed. Before we had even truly optimized anything, we saw tremendous performance improvement with our infrastructure in GovCloud, going across a VPN connection. So that, we were shocked. I was ready to say, okay, let's go back. Let's get back in our bunker, figure out how we're going to do this. We're going across VPN. That's already going to be a problem. How are we going to solve that? And the test came back and said, you don't need to do anything. You're fine. So we tightened up some processes, battened down the hatches a little bit, and our initial rollout was actually across that VPN connection. Shortly thereafter, we switched over to an SCI, but I still use the VPN as my redundant path. The performance was just that good. I've managed quite a few IT projects. This was by far the most successful I think I've ever been involved with. The weekend that we chose to migrate, I was fully prepared to start work Friday night and not stop work until Monday morning. And I told the team, this is what's going to be. Let's figure out, people's sleeping requirements. And, just tell your family you'll be back. So when we started working, we had a hiccup immediately. There was an issue with a SQL database synchronization. Again, we were sort of battle tested, right? So over the weeks, we had this problem. So we knew how to solve it, and we could solve it quick. So we overcame that hurdle, no problem. And then the migration. So I'm sitting in the office with one of the contractor operations managers, and we have a whiteboard with a bunch of tasks that need to take place. And I look over, and he's checking, done, 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 done. And now I'm looking at the time. I was like, this is incredible. Are we sure? I don't believe him. Something's wrong. And I'm looking for an error, a failure, something we overlooked. So, he and I, we're going back and we're scrubbing. And we're calling people. We're on a conference call, but we're calling people directly. Hey, did you do this? Did you check that? Send me proof. And when everything was done, we had completed the migration from the data center, and we have several terabytes of data. We had completed the migration in 7 hours. So HSIN, the entire HSIN platform, was up and running in AWS GovCloud at a high, fully redundant system. 7 hours. It's incredible. I still sometimes, something's not really possible. Now, that was great, and it was short-lived because, we rode that high, and then maybe 2 days later, reality came back, and something happened. And that oversight that I was looking for, we found it. Well, it found us. And we actually experienced a system outage, self-inflicted. Resolved it, took the smack on the hand. Definitely was my fault. It was clearly an oversight. But when you do a migration in 7 hours, you'll take that. So I stood there and took my beating with a smile. So once we went live, we you want to check things. So we did some standard checks, made sure things were right. We're shipping information to our SOC. We're fully integrated, and we feel really, really comfortable about where we are and how we're doing business. So our next step was really to begin standing up a CICD pipeline, which we didn't do deliberately. I didn't want to touch it. It didn't really provide me any advancement in getting to production. So if it didn't get me to production, I didn't care about it. CICD is great. I'm not a development guy. I don't really, CICD is a good thing. I understand it. It's fantastic. There's some sarcasm there. But we have it today. So, there were things that we, admittedly put in the backlog. Just call it tech debt. We'll deal with it later. Put it in the backlog. Get me to production. Keep driving. Keep going. So, we started to address our technical debt. Did plenty of evaluations. We did lots of lessons learned because everyone's now curious, how'd you guys do that? What'd you do? And truthfully, we didn't really do anything other than stick to good IT practices, good project management, don't boil the ocean. And once we started to do that, and we got into a really good rhythm, we were able to achieve our objective. So the lessons learned, like I just said, don't boil the ocean. Don't try to do it all. I mean, unless you have very deep pockets and there's no real timeline, have at it. I don't know that project. So the reality of it is don't boil the ocean. Do what you need to do. Licensing was huge. And as I stand here today, I feel like it's still not fully baked. Almost a year into our move. So we're still dealing with some enterprise license questions. Communication, I mean, that's this is standard. Any project, definitely something that's customer impacting. Communicate early and often. We didn't pull any punches. We didn't hide anything. In fact, the migration weekend. So again, our system can't be down. So how do I migrate? I don't know how we're going to do this. There's no backup system for HSIN when we were in a data center. So we had to communicate with our stakeholders. What do you need? What's the minimum service that I can provide you to help us get to this point where we can provide you this amazing service? So we worked with them, and we established some backup channels for them to utilize, and some manual processes that our staff had to undertake. But again, the good thing, we only had to do it for 7 hours. We thought we were going to do it, at least 4 days. I had figured a week, but. And with that, that'll bring me to the conclusion of the presentation. I have about 10 minutes to take any questions if anybody has any. Otherwise, it was my pleasure, and thank you for listening. Yes, sir.
Damon, one of your last slides had a bullet about did you meet the cost projections? Could you comment on that?
Yeah. Yes and no. You know, the cost projections are actually sort of just that. We didn't know. So there's still but there are a bunch of unknowns. So we didn't know. We actually, our engineers actually did a very good job of speccing out the cost. So we had an idea of what we were going to cost, what we were going to spend to get there. And in reality, I think we overshot the estimate, but not by much. Not enough that it really mattered. But if you want to, the good project manager would say, I missed the mark. But well worth it. And again, it was because we couldn't migrate at the time that we had planned to. So there was about 5 or 6 weeks of additional project activity that had to take place. And there was additional expense that we had never factored in for SOC support.
Hey, Damon. My name is right here. My name is Prashant. Keeping the subscription model in context, how did you manage the Capex and OPEX for this project?
I'm sorry.
Keeping the subscription model in context, how did you manage the Capex and OPEX, operational expenditure for this project?
As the operational project manager for this task, it was, I don't know how to say this without sounding too blunt. Our focus was more on getting there at any cost. So although we're certainly fiscally responsible, we're also mission driven. So understanding that balance and what matters most at that particular time. So that wasn't a major focus. And let me sort of leave it there. Is probably the best way that I can answer that.
Thank you.
Good morning. Brad Nance, Oak Ridge National Laboratory. Is HSIN accessed through a TIC? And if so, how do you handle that from a network design architecture perspective?
Absolutely. So we absolutely go through the TIC. We go through DHS's TIC. The way that HSIN has always been designed is when we lived in the data center, HSIN is essentially an outward-facing application. Extensively, it's an extranet. So those of us on the inside trying to access HSIN would typically have to go out to come back in, and that configuration still exists to this day. But we do go through the TIC.
Which TIC are you using? Are you using the data center's TIC?
Yes.
Okay. So you're coming in and then back.
Yes.
Back out to the cloud from on premises.
Yes.
Yes. Thank you.
Anyone else?
Yeah. Hi, Damon. This is Gopi Konduru. I work at DHS as well. So are these systems public-facing internet, or they're more like internal-facing, and what are the security challenges? Because I know for sure DHS still the 4300s, and they're still in the weeds and, trying to come up with a 4300C for cloud and things like that. So any insights there?
So we're fully ATO system at a high. It is absolutely a challenge. We had extensive issues trying to comply. You know, again, being one of the pioneers to GovCloud, there were unknowns, and there were areas that the risk management team just wasn't comfortable with. And they would force us to go back and remediate things that we felt we had already remediated. And it's just that there was just they just weren't comfortable with this new cloud configuration. You're right, as we go to 4300C, I think that it's going to actually help, not hurt. Today, the way that things are structured, it's a difficult task. And what HSIN is doing is actually trying to help others do what we did by offering our services. Because what we had to do is essentially build a full support structure in the cloud because there was no one else. There was no data center. In essence, we built that.
Good morning, sir. Thank you for the presentation. One of the things you had on your post-migration slide is you guys ran security scans or whatnot. I was wondering if you guys used any AWS-specific security service like, Guard Duty Inspector. If you could just comment on that, that would be great. Thank you.
I can tell you that we do utilize a lot of AWS services. However, we can only utilize services that are approved at FedRAMP High. So not all services that you might see on the commercial side, we get to take advantage of. But we do use lots of AWS services.
Hey, I'm Jason Shropshire, CTO with Infusion Points, and part of what we do is we help agencies migrate to AWS. So in hindsight, based on the experience that you've had, what kind of services can third parties like ours offer that would help you guys the most?
If you know the hurdles, so this is where the unknown unknowns, because we had many. The entire thing was unknown. As an integrator, you know those. If you can, simply, engage the government, tell us what you know and how you can help us. I can't point to a specific, but broadly speaking, and just in general, we need to understand those unknowns. I mean, I touched on many of them. If we had someone like you to help sort of expose that, I think we would have had an easier transition. What about 1 minute? Yes.
Good morning. Anne-Marie Johnson with Unisys. Fantastic and highly informative presentation.
Thank you.
You're welcome. Would like to go back to the beginning with all those partners, many stakeholders.
Yes.
Would love to know what were the positives, negatives, what changes, what improvements, what gaps, what lacks did those stakeholders have?
When we explain to our stakeholders our desire to move to Amazon GovCloud, we explain the reasons why, and they certainly understood. We were stuck in very rigid processes. We were very slow to deliver their required changes. We didn't have the redundancy that they requested that we have. So when we said, okay, we have a solution, and when we get here, we can actually be more responsive. When you come to me with your requirements, I can actually respond. That CICD thing, I can get you, changes quickly, accurately. We we can now, patch our system without taking the system down. So, those blips that you would typically feel on the weekends won't happen anymore. So they were actually ecstatic, and more so when we had projected the migration to take, an entire weekend. They only felt, a 7-hour blip. So very, very positive, and we were able to help them a lot. Thank you.